Two girls alone in the park, with a baby. The millionaire CEO instantly knew something was wrong. What began as a walk through the park became a journey of secrets, redemption, and a love he never thought he deserved. This story will break your heart, then slowly piece it back together. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and get ready to feel everything. Nathan Hale hadn't meant to walk into Central Park that morning. He hadn't meant to do much of anything, really. The truth was, most of his days blurred into each other lately, a quiet arrangement of silence and avoidance dressed up in routine. His townhouse on the Upper West Side had become a kind of private museum, every item still where it was when his world ended. The staff came in quietly and left without conversation. Groceries arrived and disappeared into cold marble counters. His phone rarely rang now. Not because he wasn't important anymore, but because Nathan had made sure there was no reason for anyone to need him. When his former assistant Anna texted him the night before about the upcoming gala, the one he used to host every spring, he didn't reply. When the news reported another merger involving the company he had built and sold, he barely looked up from his untouched coffee. And yet, that morning, as the sun tried to lift itself through the pale haze of late autumn, something made him pause. He stood by the window in a black sweater and slacks, holding a mug he hadn't sipped from, and stared at the shifting grayness beyond the glass. The world outside was moving again. People had started living. He had not. He could have buried himself in more nothings, half-read articles, unopened emails, the novel he kept pretending to finish. But instead, and without warning, he stepped away from the window, tossed on a long navy coat, and left the townhouse. His driver looked surprised when he gave the instruction. "Just take me to the park," Nathan said quietly, not specifying which one. "Any park, one with trees." The driver nodded, hesitant, but obeyed. 20 minutes later, Nathan stepped out at the west side entrance of Central Park, unsure why he was there or what he expected to find. The air was cool and dry, the kind of weather that caught at the throat and carried the smell of distant fires and turned leaves. People passed by in clusters, dog walkers, joggers, early risers with to-go cups, and nowhere urgent to be. Nathan walked slowly, hands deep in his coat pockets, his gaze flicking from the gravel paths to the fluttering orange leaves drifting down like fragile parachutes. He hadn't been in the park in over a year. Not since the funeral. Not since the last time he stood beside a tree near the lake, clutching a photo of Mira, his daughter, and wondering how it was possible that the world was still turning. He kept walking now, aimless, the early light catching on the dew-tipped grass. His shoes crunched softly on the gravel, every sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. He turned a corner near the edge of a small playground, and then stopped without meaning to. Something in the corner of his vision had caught him, a stillness too unnatural for children. There, not more than 30 feet away, stood two little girls in matching pale pink dresses, standing just off the path near a bench. One was pushing a stroller, her tiny hands gripping the handle with effort, her whole body leaning forward to keep it moving. The other walked beside her, cradling what looked like a bundled infant wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby's face was hidden, but its soft, rhythmic shifting suggested it was real and sleeping. The girls were maybe 6, maybe 7. Blonde hair light catching in tangled waves. The one with the stroller wore small white sneakers that looked too big. The other's shoes were scuffed and mismatched. There was no adult in sight. No parent calling out. No nanny rushing over. Nothing. Just the two girls and a baby moving together like a miniature caravan, slow and deliberate. Nathan's breath caught slightly. His mind immediately tried to make sense of it. Perhaps the parents were just behind a tree. Perhaps this was some eccentric family outing. Perhaps this wasn't what it looked like. But then the stroller wobbled on uneven pavement, and the girl pushing it winced, but said nothing. She simply adjusted, found balance again, and kept going. The girl with the baby clutched the blanket tighter, the fabric bunching in her small fists. Nathan took a cautious step forward. The girls paused, looked at him with identical expressions that made his heart clench, wary, but not frightened. Too calm. Too quiet. He crouched down slowly, hands open, his voice gentle. "Hi," he said. "Are you all right? Are you looking for someone?" The girl with the baby looked at her sister first, a quick glance, and then back at him. Her voice, when it came, was steady, practiced. "Our mommy's gone," she said. "She told us to wait. She said someone would come." The words sat heavy in the space between them. Nathan's mouth went dry. He glanced around again, hoping foolishly that maybe this was some mistake. But it wasn't. The girl with the stroller added, "She said we'd know who it was, the man with the sad eyes." Nathan stared at them, stunned. He felt the ground shift beneath him, not physically, but in that subtle, unbearable way a life can split open. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "I'm Mira," the girl with the stroller said. "This is Joelle. And the baby is Leo." Mira. Joelle. The names fell on him like a blow. His own daughter's name had been Mira Joelle Hale. She had died in his arms last winter after a car accident took her life and left his heart in pieces. He looked at them again, really looked, and now the features burned in. The tilt of Joelle's chin, the way Mira squared her shoulders even as she stood in a wrinkled dress. Something familiar lived in them, something he couldn't place but couldn't ignore. "What was your mom's name?" he asked, already knowing it would hurt. "Elena," Mira said. "Elena Reyes." The name hit him harder than the cold wind that had just picked up. Elena. She had been his daughter's nanny. The only person in the house who had truly understood the loss when his wife left and when Mira got sick. She had worked for him for over a year, had once left a note saying goodbye, and disappeared. He had tried to move on, assuming she'd moved away, built a life of her own. But now here were her children. Here were two girls with names that mirrored his daughter's and a baby named Leo asleep in a stroller that looked borrowed or stolen. "Where's your daddy?" he asked, even though part of him already knew the answer. Mira shook her head. "Mom said he wasn't nice, that he wouldn't come." Nathan stood slowly, his mind spinning. He pulled his phone from his coat and dialed his driver. "Bring the car," he said. "Now. Central Park, just inside the west gate." He looked down at the girls again. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, somewhere warm." Neither of them flinched. Joelle, who hadn't spoken a word, looked down at the baby and adjusted the blanket carefully, her small hand brushing Leo's cheek with delicate familiarity. Nathan crouched again. "Do you trust me?" Mira stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching. Then she nodded. "You have sad eyes," she said. "Like Mommy said." He swallowed the lump rising in his throat. 15 minutes later, his black car pulled up to the curb. The girls climbed in without a word. Nathan carefully lifted Leo, strapping him into the car seat with shaking hands. His driver didn't ask questions. Nathan didn't offer any. As they pulled away from the park, Mira leaned her head against the window, eyes wide but no longer frantic. Joelle still hadn't spoken. She held Leo's hand inside the car seat and blinked slowly, her head resting on Nathan's arm. Nathan stared out at the passing streets, feeling like he had stepped into a story that had already begun without him. But one thing was certain: he was part of it now. Whether by design or fate or guilt, he could not walk away. He had no idea what Elena had been running from, no idea how the girls had survived these past days. But he knew what they needed now. And more importantly, he knew what he needed. This wasn't a rescue. Not really. It was a return to something he hadn't even known he'd lost, to the man he once promised he'd become. He looked at Mira and Joelle and Leo, 3 children who had no one else. Then he looked at the city skyline glinting under the pale morning light. And for the first time in nearly a year, Nathan Hale felt the distant pulse of purpose stir in his chest. He didn't know what would come next. But he knew this. He would not lose them. Not now. Not again. Nathan Hale's townhouse was not prepared for children. Not in the literal sense. There were more than enough rooms, more than enough warmth, more than enough silence. But in every other way, the space was wrong. It was too polished, too sharp, filled with things that looked beautiful but offered no comfort. glass vases, marble counters, silver-framed photographs that no longer meant what they once had. The moment the black car pulled into the private drive, Nathan felt a strange pressure tighten in his chest. He looked at the two girls seated beside him. Mira had fallen asleep with her head against the window, one hand curled protectively around the strap of her backpack. Joelle had not slept. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't even blinked much. She stared at the baby the whole ride, one hand on his blanket, the other gently tracing the outline of his ear. Leo slept through it all, his tiny face calm in a world that had already proven to be unkind. Nathan stepped out first, motioning for the driver to bring the stroller around. He opened the back door, carefully crouching beside Joelle. "I'll carry him in all right," he said softly. She blinked once, then gave the smallest nod he had ever seen. He lifted Leo gently, the baby stirring only slightly in his arms, and turned toward the townhouse. Mira climbed out behind them and stood on the sidewalk looking up at the tall brownstone with its vine-covered archway and brass railing. "Is this where you live?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Nathan nodded. "Yes. For a while now." Mira tilted her head. "It looks cold." He didn't argue. The front door swung open with a quiet creak, and they stepped inside. The silence inside was different than the park. More sterile, more final. Nathan led them through the foyer, past the grand staircase, and into the living room. The girls moved slowly, their small shoes tapping against the hardwood. Mira stopped at the edge of the carpet, glancing at the white couches and steel fixtures, like someone trying to make sense of an exhibit in a museum. Joelle followed her eyes, flicking from corner to corner, never settling. Nathan gestured to the couch. "You can sit." He paused suddenly, unsure what came next. "I'll get someone to make food." He placed Leo carefully in the center of the large leather sectional, surrounding him with throw pillows and a folded blanket. Mira sat cross-legged nearby, her back straight, hands resting in her lap. Joelle stood behind the couch watching. Nathan pressed the intercom button and called for Marla, the housekeeper. "Can you make something warm? Maybe oatmeal or soup? Something light. We have guests." There was a pause on the other end before Marla's voice responded, surprised but composed. "Of course. Right away." Nathan turned back to the children. Mira was looking at a framed photo on the table, one of the last pictures taken of his daughter. It showed her on a swing in Central Park, laughing mid-motion, her cheeks flushed. Elena had taken that photo. He remembered the day now clearer than the skyline outside. It had been one of the few moments of happiness in Mira's last months. "She named us after her," Mira said softly, not looking away from the picture. Nathan's breath caught. "My mommy. She told us once after she thought we were asleep." Joelle sat beside her now, their shoulders touching. "She said we were named after someone brave and kind. Someone she loved." Nathan sat in the armchair across from them, feeling like a man watching ghosts pass through the room. "She never told me," he said. "About you. About any of this." Mira glanced at him, and for the first time he saw it, the same eyes. Not identical, but close enough. The shape of the eyebrows, the arch of the cheekbones. "Mommy said some things are too big for one person to carry out loud," Mira whispered. Nathan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Was she sick?" Mira hesitated. "She coughed a lot. Got tired easy, but she always smiled, even when it hurt." Joelle reached into her small backpack and pulled out a crumpled envelope. She handed it to Nathan without a word. He unfolded it carefully. It was addressed simply, "If found by Nathan Hale." Inside, a folded paper and a thin silver chain. No letter, just a flash drive taped to the note with a strip of worn medical tape. Nathan stared at it for a long moment, the air in the room thickening. "Did she ever say what this was?" he asked. Mira shook her head. "She said if something happened and we found you, we should give it to you. That it would help." Before he could ask more, Marla entered with a tray of food, 3 bowls of soup, small rolls, and a plate of cut fruit. She stopped short when she saw the girls. "Oh," she said softly. "Hello." Mira stood and offered a polite, practiced smile. "Thank you, ma'am." Marla blinked, clearly startled by the child's manners, then recovered. "You're welcome, sweetheart. I'll bring blankets and pajamas. Do you need anything else, Mr. Hale?" Nathan looked at her. "Make up the guest room and the office. They'll stay in there tonight." She nodded and retreated, still watching the children as she left. The girls ate without speaking, only the soft clink of spoons against bowls filling the air. Joelle fed Leo slowly from a bottle Nathan had found in the baby bag. Most of the formula had spilled, but enough remained to quiet his cries. Afterward, Mira helped Joelle brush her hair in the bathroom, their movements quiet, familiar, careful. Nathan watched from the hallway, the ache in his chest growing sharper. This was not the kind of pain that shouted. It was the kind that whispered. That tightened the lungs and made it hard to speak. When the rooms were ready, Nathan led them down the hall. The guest room had 2 twin beds, white linens, and a single plush chair by the window. Mira climbed into the bed on the left. Joelle tucked Leo into a bassinet Marla had placed between the beds. She adjusted the blanket twice, then sat beside him and stared until his breathing evened out. Nathan lingered in the doorway. "If you need anything, I'm right across the hall," he said. Mira nodded. "Thank you." Joelle didn't look at him, but she gave a small wave, just 2 fingers lifted from the blanket's edge. Back in his room, Nathan turned on his computer and inserted the flash drive. The file inside was audio only. He pressed play and sat very still. Elena's voice crackled to life. "If you're listening to this, then I guess the worst has happened. And if you're still you, the man I once knew beneath the silence and ambition, then maybe you'll understand why I did things the way I did." She paused as if thinking. "I didn't tell you about the girls because I didn't think you'd want them. Not because you're cruel, but because you were drowning in your own grief. I saw it in your eyes every day. You loved your daughter so much that you forgot how to love anything else, and I didn't want to make things heavier for you. I know I should have reached out. But by the time I had the courage, life had changed again." Her voice caught then, and Nathan closed his eyes. "If they found you, please protect them. I didn't name them out of cruelty or memory. I named them because they were the only light I had left, and Mira deserved to live on. So did we, even if in a different form." Joelle doesn't speak, not because she can't, but because the world scared her into silence. She will talk again, but only when she's safe. Only when she believes someone will stay. Another pause, then softer. "You were always meant to be more than just a builder of empires. Maybe now's your chance." The audio ended. Nathan sat for a long time in the dark, the screen glowing faintly before him. He didn't cry, not yet. But something inside him moved, shifted like a wall had cracked open just enough to let something through. When he finally stood and crossed the hall to check on the children, he found Mira asleep, one hand clutching the edge of her blanket. Joelle lay beside the crib, curled in a tight ball, her hand still resting on Leo's chest. The baby stirred but did not wake. Nathan pulled the door closed just until it clicked and leaned against the frame. 3 children he hadn't expected. 1 woman he hadn't stopped loving. A life he hadn't asked for, waiting quietly to begin again. Nathan Hale rose before dawn the next morning, though he had barely slept at all. The silence of the house, once his only companion, now pulsed with a strange energy. It no longer felt like peace. It felt like anticipation, like something was unfolding in the rooms around him. The air carried it. In the hallway, where a soft nightlight glowed just above the baseboard, he paused outside the guest room. He listened for sounds of movement, of breathing, of small feet on hardwood floors, but all was still. Mira, Joelle, and the baby had not stirred yet. He placed a hand against the door without pushing it open, and let out a breath he had been holding since he woke. In the kitchen, Marla was already preparing breakfast. She glanced up when he walked in, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "Coffee, Mr. Hale?" she asked. Nathan nodded, then shook his head. "Actually, tea, please." That surprised her. It surprised him, too. He sat at the island counter watching the steam curl from the pot she placed beside him. "Do you need me to contact anyone?" she asked carefully. "Family legal counsel." Nathan stirred the tea once. "Not yet, but I will need my lawyer later today." Quietly. Marla nodded, understood. There was a pause between them, not awkward, just heavy. She had worked in his home for almost 5 years, seen him at his worst, though never this changed. She hesitated before adding, "The girls seem strong. That kind of stillness only comes from going through something hard." "I know," Nathan said. "And the baby?" He looked down at the spoon in his hand, then back at her. "Leo, he's small. Too small to understand any of this. But I don't think he's been in anyone's arms except Joelle's for days." Marla nodded again. She went back to slicing fruit, and Nathan sipped the tea. At precisely 7, the hallway creaked faintly. Nathan rose and walked toward the sound. Mira stood there already dressed in the same pink dress from yesterday, her hair hastily combed and her face pale. She was holding Joelle's hand. Joelle wore an oversized hoodie, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and her eyes scanned the hallway with quiet calculation. "Good morning," Nathan said gently. Mira nodded. "We didn't want to wake you. You didn't. Breakfast is almost ready. There's tea if you want it. Juice, too." Joelle glanced up at him, and for a moment their eyes met. She didn't look away. She didn't smile either, but something softened. "I was thinking," Nathan said, "maybe, after breakfast we could go out. Just a short walk. It's nice out today." Mira exchanged a look with Joelle. Then she looked at him and said, "We don't have jackets." Nathan smiled just slightly. "Then we'll fix that." They ate together in the dining room, sunlight filtering in through the tall windows. Leo slept in a soft baby wrap on Joelle's chest. She sat perfectly still the entire time, one hand occasionally adjusting the fabric to keep him secure. Mira chatted softly about nothing weatherbirds outside the window, the shape of a tree she thought looked like a dragon. Nathan listened, responding when it felt natural, never pressing too hard. After breakfast, Marla helped find a few coats left behind from visiting relatives years ago. Mira's fit well enough. Joelle's was too large, but she accepted it without comment. Nathan carried Leo in a front carrier, feeling the strange but solid weight of him against his chest. The girls walked on either side of him as they made their way down the quiet street, the city just beginning to stir. Central Park looked different now. The early morning sun painted the leaves gold and copper. Joggers passed them. A man walked a terrier in a blue sweater. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played faintly. They made their way to a bench near the edge of the playground, the same bench where Nathan had first seen them. Mira ran her hand over the wood slats like she was checking for splinters. Joelle sat beside her, cradling Leo again. Nathan sat down next to them. "I came here a lot when I was your age," he said after a while. Mira looked at him. "Did you live nearby?" "No," he replied. "But my mother used to take me here on weekends. She packed terrible sandwiches. I remember that part very clearly." Joelle glanced at him then, just for a moment. "My daughter used to sit over there." Nathan continued, pointing toward a swing set nestled between two trees. "She'd swing until her hair stood straight out behind her." Mira followed his gaze. "Was that Mira?" He nodded. "Mommy said she was brave, that she had the brightest laugh she ever heard." Nathan swallowed hard. "She did." There was a long pause. Birds chirped overhead. "Why did she name us after her?" Mira asked softly. Nathan leaned back against the bench. "Because she loved her. And because she wanted you both to grow up knowing strength can come from the people we carry with us, not just the ones we lose." Joelle's head dropped slightly, and Nathan watched as her hand found Mira's under the bench. They stayed in the park for nearly an hour. Leo stirred once, let out a soft sigh, then returned to sleep. Mira drew in the dirt with a stick. Joelle watched everything people dogs whined in the trees like she was memorizing it for later. When they returned home, a man was waiting at the front door. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, his hair perfectly styled and a phone in one hand. He looked up as they approached. Nathan immediately stiffened. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Nathan. Long time. Mira moved slightly closer to him. Joelle's grip on Leo tightened. Nathan nodded, his voice cold. Victor. Victor Reyes extended a hand which Nathan ignored. I've heard some interesting things about children found in Central Park, matching names, public sightings. It didn't take much to connect the dots. Nathan stepped in front of the girls. You should leave. Victor's smile tightened. Actually, I came to talk. I believe we have a legal matter to discuss. My children were taken from my home without notice. Mira spoke up, her voice firm. You told Mommy we had to leave. You said only Leo could stay. Victor's eyes flicked to her, then to Joelle, who stood silently behind her sister. That's a very serious accusation, he said smoothly. Nathan's jaw clenched. You abandoned them. Now you want to claim them. Victor looked at Leo, then back at Nathan. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You're not their father. There's no record of adoption, no formal guardianship. You're simply a man who took in children with no claim to them. Nathan stepped forward. I have Elena's voice recording, and I have 3 children who were alone, frightened, and left to survive in a park. Victor tilted his head. You also have a business reputation to consider. I'd hate for your first public reappearance to include a custody scandal. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? Victor smiled again. I'm offering options. I'll contact my attorney. Expect a call. He turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the stone path. Inside, Nathan took the girls to the living room. Mira sat on the couch, shaking slightly. Joelle still said nothing, but her expression had changed. Not fear, not confusion, just something harder, older. Nathan crouched in front of them. He's not going to take you away, he said. Do you believe me? Joelle finally looked him in the eye and nodded. Once. Nathan stood and picked up the phone. Call Mr. Lang, he told Marla. Tell him I need him at the house today. No delays, because this was no longer a matter of accident or compassion. This was war. And Nathan Hale had already lost 1 daughter. He would not lose 3 more. The sun was still climbing when Nathan Hale stood at the window of his study, the same window that once overlooked a world he had commanded with absolute control. Today, the world outside moved without waiting for him, and that strange feeling of helplessness settled deeper into his bones. The children were upstairs with Marla, who had quietly shifted from housekeeper to caretaker without needing to be asked. Mira was helping fold towels while Joelle sat beside Leo, humming under her breath as she rocked his bassinet with slow, steady hands. The melody was soft, almost invisible, and Nathan did not recognize it, but it was the first time he had heard her make sound in his presence. That alone changed the shape of his morning. Mr. Lang arrived at 9:30. He was a short man with a hawk-like gaze and the habit of reading everything in a room before speaking. He had been Nathan's attorney for over a decade through hostile takeovers and philanthropic ventures and that one scandal involving offshore patents that never made it to the press. But this was different. This was not business. This was blood, or something that felt even more binding. Nathan met him at the front door, shook his hand once, and led him into the study without preamble. I need full guardianship of all 3 children, he said, even before Mr. Lang had set his briefcase down. Quietly, quickly, and I want a restraining order placed against Victor Reyes before the end of the day. Mr. Lang blinked. That's a leap, Nathan? What are we dealing with? Nathan sat down behind his desk and reached for the folder he had prepared earlier that morning. Inside were printouts of the park police report he had filed, anonymously screenshots of text messages from Victor to Elena that had been recovered from her old phone. Marla had found it zipped inside the diaper bag, and a transcript of Elena's voice recording from the flash drive. At the back of the folder, he had included a signed statement he had written himself describing the moment he found the children in the park and the condition they had been in. Mr. Lang read quickly but thoroughly, his eyes narrowing as he flipped each page. "These texts," he said, tapping one of the printed screenshots, "they're threatening. And you're certain they're real?" I checked the phone myself. The SIM is intact. The timestamps line up with the timeline of when Elena left Victor's residence. She left voluntarily, yes, but under pressure. He made it clear he did not want the girls. Only Leo. Mr. Lang nodded slowly, and the recording Nathan played the voice memo again. Elena's voice filled the room steady, but worn, full of the kind of tired love that haunts the living long after the dead are gone. When it ended, the silence in the study deepened. "Well," Mr. Lang said finally, "it's not a formal will, but it's powerful, especially emotionally. That might be more persuasive than anything else in a family court." Nathan stood and moved to the window again. He came to the house. Yesterday, talked like a man who already knew which strings to pull. He's not interested in raising them. He's interested in control. And I will not let him touch them. Mr. Lang looked thoughtful. "Do you have any proof of Leo's paternity?" Nathan shook his head. "No, not yet. I don't care if he's Victor's child by blood. That man abandoned him and his sisters in a park. He doesn't deserve a claim." "Then let's act on what we do know," Mr. Lang said. "I'll file for emergency temporary guardianship today. That will give you physical custody of all 3 children for 30 days. During that time, we gather every document, every witness, every scrap of evidence to support your claim for permanent guardianship. If we get the judge on our side early, Victor will have a hard time reversing anything, and the restraining order, I can include it in the emergency motion. If the judge agrees that Victor poses a threat to the children's well-being, we can prevent him from approaching them during the guardianship process." Nathan nodded. "Do it. Whatever it takes." Mr. Lang opened his briefcase and pulled out the necessary forms. "We'll need statements from you, also from anyone who witnessed the children's condition when you found them. That housekeeper of yours, Marla, can she testify to how they were when they arrived? She would do anything for them." "Good. We'll need to show the court that you're providing a stable environment, that they're thriving under your care." Nathan let out a slow breath. "They are. Mira reads aloud at night. Joel is starting to hum again. Leo doesn't cry when I hold him anymore." Mr. Lang looked up from the papers, something softening in his gaze. "You sound like a father." "I never stopped being one," Nathan replied. "I just forgot for a while." The rest of the morning passed in quiet urgency. Marla provided a full account of the children's arrival and condition. Nathan dictated a formal statement, recounting every detail from that first moment in the park to the encounter with Victor on his doorstep. He included how the girls had responded, how Joelle had not spoken, but had clung to her baby brother with unrelenting protectiveness. He described the bruises he had seen faintly on Mira's arm and the weight loss that the pediatrician whom he had already called would confirm at their upcoming appointment. By midday, the paperwork was compiled, reviewed, and filed with the family court clerk under expedited consideration. Mr. Lang left with a promise to return as soon as a judge issued a ruling. Nathan stood on the front steps, watching him disappear down the sidewalk, his briefcase swinging like a pendulum of possibility. That afternoon, Nathan took the children out again, this time to a small bookstore nestled between 2 bakeries on the east side. It was quiet, full of warm light and worn leather chairs, and the owner, a woman in her 60s named Deirdre, greeted them with the kind of joy reserved for lifelong customers. Nathan had not been there in almost a year, but she remembered him. "Back for another round of fairy tales?" she asked with a wink. He gestured to the girls. "Something better this time. They're the ones choosing." Deirdre's smile widened. "Even better." Mira walked slowly through the aisles, trailing her fingers along the spines of books like they were treasure. Joelle stayed close, still holding Leo, but her eyes moved more freely now. She pointed once, and Mira followed her finger to a collection of illustrated fables. They pulled it down together and sat cross-legged on the rug, turning pages without speaking. Nathan stood nearby watching them, his heart tightening with every passing minute. This small, ordinary moment felt more important than any boardroom deal he had ever made. When they returned home, there was a message waiting on the answering machine. Nathan played it twice before he called the number back. The voice on the other end belonged to a judge's clerk. "Temporary guardianship has been granted, Mr. Hale. You are now the legal caretaker of Mira Reyes, Joel Reyes, and Leo Reyes, pending further proceedings." Nathan thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in his chair. The house felt different now, not just legally, but emotionally. Like something had settled into place, like the foundation beneath them had thickened. That evening, over bowls of pasta and quiet laughter, Mira told him about the time Elena tried to make pancakes and set off the fire alarm. Joelle mimed the chaos that followed, waving her arms like a frantic bird, and for the first time Nathan heard the sound of her giggle, soft and short, like the first flicker of a candle. It was the most beautiful sound he had heard in years. After dinner, while Marla bathed, Leo and Joelle lay reading beside Mira. Nathan returned to his study. He pulled open the drawer where he had placed Elena's locket and the flash drive. He held the chain in his hand for a long time, then looked at the photograph of his daughter that still stood on the far corner of his desk. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered aloud, "but I think you'd be proud of them. I think you'd like them." From the hallway, a soft knock. Mira peeked her head inside. "Joelle wants to show you something," she said. He followed her to their room where Joelle was kneeling on the rug with a stack of drawings. She held one up, 3 figures holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. The tallest figure had gray hair and a tiny baby carrier drawn across his chest. In the corner, Mira had written a name in bright red marker. It said family. Nathan knelt beside her and took the drawing carefully. "Thank you," he said. Joelle looked up at him, and though she said nothing, her smile was enough. It was the kind of smile that said, "You stayed." And Nathan knew then that whatever came next, courts, lawyers, battles with Victor, it would not change this. They were no longer lost, and neither was he. Nathan did not sleep that night, not because of nightmares or old ghosts, but because Joelle had crawled into his bed around midnight and fallen asleep on his arm with the weight of trust tucked against his ribs. He did not move for hours, not even when his shoulder went numb, or when Leo stirred in the next room and let out a brief, soft cry before settling again. Somewhere in the stillness he had realized this was the first time anyone had touched him in their sleep without flinching since Emily died. It did not feel like a replacement. It felt like an opening. By the time dawn lit the edges of the sky, he was already awake, a quiet resolve building in his chest. The court hearing was coming in 3 days. He had secured temporary guardianship, but that was only the beginning. Victor Reyes had money connections and enough public charm to paint himself as a misunderstood father trying to reunite with his children. Nathan had seen men like him before, polished on the outside, hollow where it mattered. But there was one thing Victor would never have. He would never have those quiet moments of trust that Joelle and Mira were starting to offer. He would never have the way Leo curled his fingers around Nathan's shirt when he was rocked to sleep. And he would never know Elena's voice from the inside out the way Nathan did. He had loved her in silence then, at a distance, and now through the children she left behind. Later that morning, Marla packed the diaper bag and kissed the children goodbye as Nathan bundled them into the car. He had called in a favor from a pediatrician friend who ran a small private clinic on the Upper East Side. It was a quiet place with soft walls and a kind receptionist who gave Joelle a sticker in the shape of a sunflower. The girls behaved perfectly during the checkups. Mira was underweight by 7 pounds for her age. Joelle's arm showed signs of older bruising that had already faded but were clearly documented in the report. Leo, surprisingly, was healthy, just small for his age. The doctor, a warm woman named Harriet Kim, wrote up a full report and agreed to submit it as a supporting document for the guardianship case. She even offered to testify if needed. Afterward, Nathan took them to a bookstore cafe around the corner. Mira chose a paperback with a watercolor cover and read aloud softly, while Joelle colored a napkin with crayons from her pocket. Leo slept with his cheek pressed against Nathan's chest. The world outside the window moved slowly, with children laughing and buses hissing by, but Nathan's table felt like a separate orbit. He no longer felt like a visitor in their lives. He felt like a tether. As they returned to the car, a dark sedan pulled into the spot across the street. Nathan barely registered it until the window rolled down and Victor Reyes leaned out with a half smile that did not reach his eyes. "How nice," Victor said. "A play date with your replacement family." Nathan tightened his grip on the car seat. "This isn't the place, Victor. Every place is the place when you're trying to save what's yours," Victor said. "I filed an emergency appeal. Family court has already moved the hearing up. You'll get the paperwork by the end of the day." Nathan stared at him. "You really think a judge is going to hand those kids over to you? They're mine by blood," Victor said with a shrug. "And you're the washed-up has-been who vanished for 10 months after a little tragedy. They're going to love hearing that story." "You mean the story where a grieving father took time to process his loss instead of destroying everything around him? Spin it however you want," Victor said. "I've got lawyers. I've got receipts. And you've got 3 children who don't even share your last name." Nathan didn't respond. He opened the back door and gently placed Leo inside, then helped Joelle into her seat. Mira climbed in last, silent but alert. Victor watched all of it from across the street, his expression unreadable. "Say goodbye now," he said as the window rolled up again, "because next time you won't get to walk away with them." Nathan drove away without looking back, but his knuckles stayed white on the wheel until they reached home. That evening, he met with Mr. Lang again. The new court date had indeed been moved. They now had just 48 hours. Lang looked over the appeal documents Victor's team had filed. He's claiming paternity over Leo and asserting sibling rights for the girls. He's painting himself as a father who made hard choices, not a man who abandoned 3 children in a park. Nathan paced the study. "Can we get the pediatrician to testify?" "Already called her," Lang said. "She's in. We'll also need character references. People who can testify to your ability to parent and your relationship with the children." Nathan hesitated. "I've only had them in my care for 5 days." "That doesn't matter," Lang said. "What matters is the environment you've created for them and the actions you've taken. We need proof of consistency, nurturing stability." Nathan glanced at the door where a faint giggle from upstairs floated down the hall. "They're not ready to be moved again, especially not into Victor's hands." "Then we need to make that argument with everything we've got," Lang said, "including Elena's voice recording." "I think that could be our anchor." Nathan pulled the flash drive from his desk and handed it to Lang. "Use whatever you need." The next day, while the girls painted in the garden with Marla and Leo napped on a blanket under the shade Nathan prepared, he called Deirdre from the bookstore. He contacted Harriet Kim for a written affidavit in addition to her court testimony. He even reached out to a former therapist who had counseled him after Emily's death, someone who could speak to the emotional work he had done over the past year. He wanted no cracks left for Victor to crawl through. That evening something changed. Joelle spoke. It was just one word. She had spilled a cup of juice on the rug and looked up at Nathan with wide eyes expecting punishment or at least sharpness. But Nathan knelt down, wiped it up without a sigh and said, "No big deal. Accidents happen." Joelle stared at him, her lips parting. Then she whispered, "Sorry." Mira gasped. Marla dropped the dish she was drying, and Nathan simply smiled and said, "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart." That one word did more than soften the house. It shifted something inside Nathan that had long been calcified. The hearing came the next morning. They arrived early. Marla stayed behind with Leo, while Nathan, Mira, and Joelle walked into the courthouse. The girls held hands, both wearing pale yellow dresses that Elena had once sewn herself. They had been found in the bottom of the old diaper bag. Nathan wore a charcoal suit, the same one he had worn to Emily's funeral, but today it felt different. This wasn't mourning. This was a fight for something alive. The courtroom was simple. Wooden benches, high windows, a judge with kind eyes but a sharp gavel. Victor arrived late, his lawyer flanking him like armor. The hearing began. Lang opened with a calm but compelling statement. He painted a picture of children in need of a man who stepped in without hesitation of evidence and emotional bonds that had already taken root. He played Elena's voice recording aloud in court. When she said the words, "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone," there wasn't a dry eye on the bench. Victor's lawyer countered with paperwork, emphasizing biology responsibility and Victor's desire to reconnect. He painted Nathan as a recluse and a man using the children to fill his own emotional void. "Is it true," Mr. Hale, the lawyer, asked during cross-examination, "that you disappeared from your company and your public life after your daughter's death?" "Yes," Nathan said simply. "And would you agree that your grief might compromise your judgment about what's best for these children?" "No," Nathan said. It sharpened it. "Explain." Nathan turned to the judge. "Because grief taught me what it means to lose someone you love. It taught me that silence is not peace. It taught me that children need more than food and shelter. They need presence, and I have never been more present than I am now." The judge nodded and called a brief recess. Nathan sat with the girls on the bench outside. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. Joelle slipped her fingers into his hand. When the court resumed, the judge reviewed every document. Then she asked the children to approach. Mira stood tall. Joelle hesitated but walked with her sister. The judge asked them if they felt safe with Nathan. Mira nodded without pause. Then Joelle surprised everyone. She stepped forward, looked up at the judge, and said softly, "He stayed." The room fell silent. That single sentence seemed to echo against every wall. The judge ruled within minutes. Full guardianship was granted to Nathan Hale. Victor was issued a restraining order and denied visitation rights pending further investigation. Outside the courthouse, Nathan crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "You are safe now," he said. Mira smiled. Joelle did not speak, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and held tight. And in that embrace, Nathan understood something deeper than law or duty or even love. He had not just saved them. They had saved him. The days after the court hearing passed like a slow exhale, as if the house itself had been holding its breath all this time. Marla baked more often. Mira filled the rooms with piano melodies plucked from memory, and Joelle began whispering small sentences to Leo during breakfast, her words cautious but growing bolder with every smile that was met without judgment. The walls of Nathan's brownstone began to feel lived in, not just filled. Picture books piled on the coffee table. Tiny socks in mismatched pairs rested under the couch. And on the refrigerator hung a page Joelle had drawn herself a wobbly stick figure with a yellow tie holding hands with 2 girls and a baby. Nathan recognized the tie. It was the one he wore on the day he met them in Central Park. Nathan had not been to his office in months, not since stepping down as CEO of Haven Technologies. But one morning, just after the court's decision, he received a call from Lydia Tran, the company's acting president and longtime friend. She said the board wanted to meet not to pressure him to return, but to honor a promise. Haven had grown into more than software. It had become a platform for accessible care, and now, thanks to new partnerships, they were launching a new foundation branch focused on trauma-informed support for foster and adopted children. Lydia asked if Nathan would consider becoming its face. Not the strategist, not the figurehead for quarterly growth, just the person who showed up and told the truth. Nathan hesitated, then looked toward the living room where Joelle was curled beside Marla with a storybook, and Mira was teaching Leo to clap to the rhythm of her humming. The answer came softly. He said yes. A week later, he stood at the front of the conference hall. The space was sleek, modern, dotted with white chairs and small potted plants, but Nathan could barely feel the nerves in his hands because Mira was sitting in the front row, her legs crossed like she owned the place, and Joelle had drawn a small star on the back of his hand for good luck. He spoke about what it meant to lose a child. Not the statistics, not the headlines, but the silence after. He spoke about the moment he found 2 little girls with a baby in Central Park, and knew that some things are not accidents. He spoke about how Elena had once saved him when he did not know he needed saving, and how her children had done it again in the simplest way by asking him to stay. When he finished, the room was quiet for a breath, and then it filled with applause that felt less like praise and more like witness, After the event, while Nathan helped Joelle tie her shoes outside the building, a woman in her 60s approached. She had warm eyes and a file in her hands. She introduced herself as Claire Bellamy, an independent social worker who had once reviewed Elena's emergency placement request when she first fled Victor. Claire said she had kept a copy of Elena's personal statement, just in case it might one day help someone tell her story. Nathan took the file home and read every word that night. In it, Elena wrote about guilt and survival and choosing silence to protect the only people who mattered. She wrote that she had never known if she would be believed, but she hoped her children would one day know she tried. On the final page, she scribbled a list. It included Leo's allergies, Joelle's sensitivity to loud noises, Mira's love for watercolors, and then one short sentence at the bottom: Nathan Hale will never know what he gave me just by being kind. I wish I had been brave enough to tell him. The next morning, Nathan brought the children to the cemetery for the first time. It was quiet, cold, the trees bare and the ground soft from last night's rain. He carried Leo and walked slowly with Mira and Joelle on either side. Elena's headstone was simple. The girls did not cry. They stood still, staring at the stone, with the kind of stillness only children could manage when they were not quite sure what grief was supposed to feel like. Nathan crouched beside them and pulled out a folded letter he had written the night before. He read aloud. He told Elena that the children were safe, that Joelle was speaking again, that Mira wanted to learn how to play the cello, that Leo had begun to laugh in his sleep. He told her that he had found her voice on a flash drive, tucked into a blanket, and that it had changed everything. Then he told her the thing he had not even known he needed to say, that he had loved her quietly with all the restraint of a man who never felt like he had the right, that she had been the only light left after Emily, that she had given him back something no one else could, that he would never let go of what remained. Afterward, Mira placed a small watercolor painting against the headstone. It showed 4 stick figures under a tree with a 5th figure drawn in the clouds above, smiling. The drive home was quiet. That evening, they watched a movie with popcorn and blankets on the floor. Nathan did not check his phone. He did not think about boardrooms or venture capital or headlines. He just sat between the girls, Leo asleep on his chest again, and listened to the sound of belonging. Days turned into weeks. Joelle started school. Mira joined a small art class on Saturdays. Nathan began volunteering twice a week at the Foundation's new center, reading to children who had just entered foster care, helping them build routines and tiny rituals of comfort. He knew that not all stories ended like theirs. But he also knew that beginnings mattered, and sometimes what looked like the end was only a turning point. One evening, just before bedtime, Mira came into his study holding an envelope. It was addressed to him in Elena's handwriting. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Mira said she had discovered it inside the old music box Elena had brought with them, the one Joelle kept her crayons in now. Nathan opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Elena sitting under a tree in Central Park, Mira in her lap, Joelle asleep against her shoulder, and Leo no more than a few weeks old in her arms. Behind the photo was a note. It said only this: "If you find them before I can say it, tell them they were always enough. And you were too." Nathan sat still for a long time, the letter resting against his chest. Then he stood, walked to the girls' room, and sat at the edge of Joelle's bed. She stirred and blinked up at him. "Everything okay?" she whispered. Nathan smiled. "Yes, everything's more than okay." He kissed her forehead, tucked the blanket under her chin, and turned off the light. When he returned to his study, he opened his laptop and began writing again. Not code, not contracts, but something else. A book. About a man who found 3 children in a park and realized that sometimes the family you lose leads you to the family you were always meant to find. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the windows. Inside, the house was full of breath and warmth and the steady sound of feet running down the hallway just before bedtime. And in that moment, Nathan Hale no longer felt like a man trying to rebuild his life. He felt like a father who had simply come home. The first thing Nathan did after receiving full guardianship was not celebrate. There was no champagne, no grand announcement. Instead, he took the girls and Leo on a quiet road trip upstate to a small cabin once owned by his parents. It had sat unused for over a decade, the paint peeling the porch soft with time. But Nathan remembered it as the only place that had ever felt peaceful after Mira's death. He had come here once years ago, hoping solitude would quiet the pain. Now he returned not to forget but to remember differently. With them. With the children who had shifted his life without ever asking him to. The drive took most of the day. Joelle made up riddles and Mira tracked road signs and Leo babbled to the rhythm of the tires. Nathan kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching their reflection and wondering how on earth this had become his life and how he had ever lived without it. The cabin was old, but sturdy. They dusted off the furniture together. Joelle insisted on sweeping using a broom twice her size. Mira found a box of Nathan's childhood books and set up a reading corner. Leo was content crawling across the floorboards, chasing the sunlight as it shifted through the trees. That first night, they roasted marshmallows over the fire pit. Mira talked about school, about how one of her classmates had asked if Nathan was her grandfather. Nathan had laughed, but Mira had defended him with pride, saying that families came in all kinds of shapes and they were the best kind. Joelle drew a picture by firelight. It showed the cabin with 4 stick figures and a small dog. They did not have a dog, but when Nathan asked, she said softly, "Maybe one day." The next morning, Nathan found a folder left in his suitcase. It had been slipped there by Marla, who had helped him pack. Inside was a copy of the final court transcript, the part where Mira had spoken trembling but firm. She had looked at the judge and said, "We do not want to go with that man. He never played with us. He never made us pancakes or held us when we cried. Nathan does. He knows us. We want to stay." Nathan read those words alone in the kitchen, the sound of Joelle's soft singing echoing from the porch. And for the first time since the hearing, he let himself cry. Not from grief, from something deeper, relief, gratitude, love. Later that day, while Leo napped, Mira and Joelle asked to explore the forest path behind the cabin. Nathan agreed, walking with them as they pointed at squirrels and gathered pine cones. At a clearing, they found a tree with initials carved into the bark. Nathan stepped closer. It was his and Mira's mother's initials carved when they were teenagers. He had forgotten that moment, that impulsive belief in permanence. Mira traced the letters with her fingers. "Did you love her?" she asked. Nathan looked at the girls. "Yes," he said quietly, "but not the way I loved your mother." They blinked up at him. Elena Joelle whispered. Nathan nodded. She was brave. She carried everything alone for too long, and still she made you feel safe. Joelle reached for his hand. "You do too now." That night while the girls slept, Nathan sat outside beneath the stars with a notebook. He was planning something. Not for work, not for headlines. For the future. Their future. He began mapping out how to formally adopt Leo. The process would be different, more difficult, as Victor still had distant legal ties through a birth certificate he had forced Elena to sign. But Nathan was not afraid anymore. He had learned that love meant staying, showing up, over and over, even when it hurt. Back in the city, the momentum continued. Mira's school held a fall art show, and one of her paintings, a portrait of Elena surrounded by clouds with Joelle and Leo beside her, was chosen for the newsletter. Joelle started reading out loud during bedtime, a huge milestone that made Nathan beam every time she sounded out a difficult word. Leo began standing laughing every time Nathan clapped, and slowly the brownstone transformed again. The guest room became a playroom. The walls grew richer with fingerprints, drawings, and photographs. There were still moments when Nathan woke up with a pang of grief, especially on the anniversary of his daughter's passing. But now there were arms around his neck, a sleepy whisper of "Daddy, it's morning," or "Can we make waffles?" that reminded him joy could exist beside sorrow. That love was never limited to the past. Then came the letter. It was delivered to his office, slipped beneath the door in an envelope with no return address. Inside was a legal notice. Victor was challenging Leo's guardianship. He claimed to be the biological father and demanded access. Nathan's breath caught. He knew this man. He knew Victor had never cared about Leo, only about control. The same control he had tried to use over Elena. But the letter made it clear. Victor had hired a new legal team and wanted to fight. Nathan spent the evening on the phone with Lydia and then with Claire Bellamy, the social worker, who had helped during the previous hearing. Claire said calmly that she had seen this before. Men like Victor waited until things looked stable, then struck. Not out of love, out of ego. She reminded Nathan that they had a strong case, that Elena's voice memo, the court's earlier ruling, and the girl's own wishes mattered. But Nathan could not sleep that night. He lay awake, listening to Leo's breathing and wondering how many battles a heart could endure before it cracked. In the morning, Mira came into his study with a folded piece of paper. "Joelle drew this," she said, placing it on his desk. Nathan opened it. It was a picture of a lion standing in front of a courtroom with 2 girls and a baby behind him. In big, shaky letters, Joelle had written, "We are brave because you are." Nathan smiled through the ache in his chest. He knew then that he would fight again, not just for legal custody, for peace, for security, for them. Over the following weeks, Nathan prepared. He met with lawyers, revisited documents, and began gathering character witnesses. Lydia agreed to testify. So did Marla. Claire provided a statement. But the most surprising support came from a woman Nathan had never expected to see again, Mira's old teacher from her first school. She had found Nathan's number through the art newsletter and reached out to say how much Mira had changed since moving in with him. She offered to speak about the emotional progress, the healing she had witnessed from afar. Nathan accepted. Every brick in the wall they were building counted. The night before the hearing, Nathan sat on the floor with Joelle coloring beside her. She looked up suddenly and asked, "What if that man says mean things again?" Nathan looked her in the eyes. "Then I will listen, and then I will speak, and you will not be alone. Ever." She nodded and went back to her drawing. Mira came over with Leo, and they all sat together, a quiet huddle of hope and crayons and something stronger than fear. The courtroom was colder this time. Victor sat smugly with his lawyer, but Nathan focused only on the bench where the children would wait. Mira held Joelle's hand. Leo babbled softly in Marla's arms. The judge reviewed the previous ruling, then allowed Victor to present his case. Victor spoke of rights biology and bloodlines. He never mentioned Elena by name, never said the word love. When it was Nathan's turn, he did not raise his voice. He simply said this: "Family is not made by signatures. It is made by stories, by sleepless nights and first steps and holding hands during thunderstorms. I may not share Leo's blood, but I share his life, and I will protect it with mine." Joelle whispered something to Mira, who leaned over and told the judge, "Joelle wants to say something." The courtroom hushed. Joelle stood, slowly walked to the bench and held up a drawing. It was the lion again. She pointed to it and then at Nathan. Then she whispered, "That's my daddy." The judge looked down, face unreadable. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Joelle." By the end of the hearing, the decision was unanimous. Victor's petition was denied. Nathan retained guardianship and was granted the right to formally adopt Leo, pending final paperwork. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time all morning. Mira threw her arms around Nathan. Joelle tucked her head into his chest, and Leo, oblivious to the weight of the moment, laughed as a pigeon flew too close. They celebrated quietly. Hot chocolate at their favorite diner, a new storybook at the bookstore, a walk through Central Park, the place where it had all begun. Nathan looked around at the trees, the benches, the winding paths, and thought how strange it was that one simple morning could shift everything. That a man walking alone could stumble upon 3 lives and be handed a second chance he did not know he still deserved. That night, as the girls slept, Nathan stood outside their door listening. It was something he did often now, not because he worried, but because he found peace in the quiet rise and fall of breath, in the safety he had helped create, in the love that had taken root where grief once bloomed. And in that silence, he whispered to himself the only vow that mattered. I will not leave. I will not forget. I am yours as long as you are mine. And somewhere, maybe not far, the memory of Elena smiled in the darkness, knowing that her children had found home. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles as Nathan flipped the last pancake onto a plate. Joelle was humming off-key beside him, carefully pouring juice into 4 mismatched glasses, her tongue poking out in concentration. Mira sat cross-legged on the counter, reading aloud from a book about galaxies, occasionally pausing to explain big words to Leo, who was far more interested in banging a spoon against his tray. Nathan watched them with a kind of still awe, a quiet reverence. He still had not fully grasped how this life became his. But it had. It was no longer a temporary shelter. It was home, and today it would be written into law. The adoption hearing for Leo was scheduled for noon. The final one, the last legal thread that still connected them to Victor, would be severed. Nathan had picked out clothes the night before, even polished his shoes, something he had not done since his boardroom days. Mira had chosen a pale blue dress for Joelle, one that Elena used to keep folded at the top of the closet for birthdays and special dinners. Nathan had found it while cleaning and kept it aside. Joelle had not said much when she saw it, but she had clutched it to her chest and nodded. As they got ready, Nathan's phone buzzed. A message from Lydia. She was waiting at the courthouse already. She had sent a picture of the judge's bench with a caption, "Ready when you are." Nathan smiled. She had stood by them through everything, quietly relentless in her support. Not long after, a car pulled up to the house. Marla was in the front seat. She had insisted on taking the day off to be there, claiming she had helped raise Nathan, and therefore had every right to watch him raise someone else. The drive was quiet, filled with soft chatter, the girls pointing out dogs they saw on the sidewalks and Leo clapping every time a bus passed. At the courthouse steps, Mira hesitated. She looked up at Nathan and said, "Do you think Mommy can see us today?" Nathan knelt down, adjusting the clip in her hair. "I think she sees you every day," he said. "But today, I think she'll be closer than ever." Mira nodded solemnly. Joelle reached for Nathan's hand. "Do I have to talk again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan shook his head. "Not unless you want to." She squeezed his fingers tighter. The courtroom was smaller this time, intimate, warm. The judge, who had presided over their previous hearing, greeted them with a smile. She remembered them. She commented on how much Leo had grown and how steady Joelle seemed now. Nathan had submitted letters from the girls' school pediatric reports, therapist statements, all reflecting the same truth. These children were safe, happy, healing. The judge looked through the folder of papers, then turned to Nathan. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "is there anything you would like to say for the record?" Before I sign the adoption decree, Nathan rose slowly. He had not planned a speech, but he found himself speaking anyway. When I first met Leo, he was bundled in a pink blanket on a bench in Central Park. He did not cry. He just stared at me, like he knew something I didn't. I had no idea then how much he would change me, how much all 3 of them would. I've built companies, I've stood on magazine covers, but this is the only thing that's ever made me feel whole. I choose him. I choose all of them. Every day. There was a pause. The judge blinked rapidly, then smiled. "Then it is with great joy that I declare Leo Thomas Brooks to be from this day forward Leo Thomas Sullivan." Joelle clapped. Mira jumped to her feet, and Leo, startled by the noise, promptly sneezed on Nathan's tie. Afterward, they stood on the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at Joelle's hair. Lydia took a photo Nathan with all 3 children, arms wrapped around them, his smile wide and unguarded. It would later become the first picture framed in their new hallway, a symbol not just of legality but of belonging. In the weeks that followed, life found a rhythm again, a new normal. Mira won a poetry contest at school. Joelle started therapy art sessions and surprised everyone by painting a vivid cityscape capturing New York's skyline in a way that felt far beyond her years. Leo took his first real steps across the living room floor, arms outstretched, landing directly in Nathan's lap. They laughed. They cried. They cooked terrible pasta once and fed it to pigeons as a joke. They lived. One afternoon, Nathan received a call from a former colleague, a quiet man named Elliot, who had once handled public relations at Nathan's firm. He told Nathan that a reporter had reached out wanting to do a story, not about the scandal, about the family, about the man who had walked away from a legacy to build another one entirely. Nathan hesitated. He no longer sought headlines, but Elliot said something that stayed with him. Sometimes people need to see what rebuilding looks like. Not in magazines, in real life. Nathan agreed, on the condition that the children's privacy be protected. The article came out a month later. It spoke not of wealth or downfall, but of second chances, of love forged through patience, of how a man once known for ambition had found something far more lasting. The headline read, "From Boardroom to Backyard, the Quiet Redemption of Nathan Sullivan." It included a quote from Joel, who had whispered it to the writer during a visit. "He tucks us in. Every night. No one ever did that before." Letters poured in. Emails. Messages from strangers. Some shared their own stories of guardianship, of adoption, of loss. Others simply said thank you. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Teresa who had known Elena during her years as a night nurse. She wrote about the way Elena would speak of her children, the way she had once said, "I don't know if I'll get to raise them myself, but I'm going to make sure they land somewhere soft." Nathan folded that letter and kept it in his wallet. Summer arrived. The brownstone buzzed with fans and popsicles and the sound of sidewalk chalk being scraped into concrete. Nathan took the kids to the aquarium where Joel informed a startled tourist that sea lions were just wet dogs with better PR. Mira got a library card and checked out 12 books in one go. Leo developed a habit of climbing onto the sofa and throwing pillows at unsuspecting guests. It was chaos. It was magic. One evening after the children were in bed, Nathan sat in the quiet living room. He looked around at the space. The walls were no longer bare. Every surface told a story. A crayon drawing here, a crooked frame there. He pulled out a box from beneath the couch. Inside were the letters, the voice recording, the final picture of Elena smiling, holding Leo in the hospital. He lit a candle beside it, whispering the same words every time. "Thank you. I will protect them." There was a knock at the door. Marla stepped in holding a small package. "It came for you," she said. Nathan opened it. Inside was a wooden airplane, hand-carved. On the wings were initials EB and NS. He turned it over. Carved into the bottom were 4 names: Mira, Joel, Leo, Nathan. Marla's eyes filled. "She planned this," she whispered. "Even this." That night, Nathan placed the airplane on the shelf above the fireplace. A reminder of beginnings, of promises, of everything they had survived. And somewhere far from courtrooms and titles, a family gathered around bedtime stories. A little girl who once feared thunderstorms now chased them. A baby who once waited in silence now babbled with joy. A man who had once built an empire now built pillow forts and carried Band-Aids in his wallet. And as the lights dimmed, Joel whispered, "Daddy, tell us the story again. The one where you found us in the park." And Nathan began his voice, low and warm. "Once upon a time I was walking through Central Park, and I saw 2 little girls and a baby. And I knew right then my life was about to change forever." And as the sun set behind the brownstone windows with bedtime stories echoing through the halls and love finally written into law, one truth remained. Sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances in love that doesn't quit, and in the quiet power of showing up, make sure to subscribe. Your next story is already waiting.